here we go. We're going to go ahead and jump in. I am going to ask that anyone who has questions, please wait until the end of the presentation to bring them up. If you have questions that come up during the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We have some of our team members on here that will be keeping track of those questions and make sure that they get to us in order of priority if we don't answer them during the presentation itself. So without further ado, here we go. Thank you everyone for joining us. The criminal justice team here at Texas Appleseed, we are going to be giving a webinar on our Driven by Debt report, our new report, which is an updated analysis of the state's failure to appear/pay program. Presenting today will be myself. I'm Dr. Jennifer Carrion. I am the director of the Criminal Justice Project. Also with me is our policy associate, our policy intern, Chris Casella, and our policy analyst, Cole Meyer. A little bit about us. Texas Appleseed is a data-driven nonprofit that works to support children, families, and communities through policy change up at the state and local level. Here at Texas Appleseed, we want to make sure that Texas is fair and just for everyone here in the state of Texas, and so we work to advocate for that change. Just a quick presentation overview so that you all know what we are going to be going over before we jump into it. First and foremost, what is the failure to appear/pay program? What we knew about the FTAP program prior to this current study that we jumped into. The study of hand, of course, be the overview, research questions, data and methods, findings, and of course, the limitations associated with that study. What works in addressing court appearance rates, because ultimately we're talking about appearance and payment compliance. And then of course, our recommendations in conclusion. As I said, we work at the state and the local level to change policy. And so we definitely have some recommendations for decision makers out there that are looking to help address this detrimental program. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Cole, and he will take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Cole Meyer. I am a policy analyst on the Criminal Justice Project at Texas Appleseed. I have my master's in public affairs from the University of Texas at Austin, and my main role on our team is doing lots of policy research and writing on a variety of issues. The failure to appear program is the biggest issue area that I work on, as it is our Criminal Justice Project's biggest priority. So to start out, I wanted to give y'all a quick overview of what the failure to appear/pay program is. So under Texas law, municipal and justice of the peace courts, so county courts, can place holds on somebody's driver's license if they're unable to pay off court debt from low-level fine-only offenses. And this is largely traffic tickets. So when somebody gets a hold placed on their driver's license, they have to pay off all of their fines and fees associated with that hold in order for it to be lifted. So let's say somebody is getting a $200 speeding ticket. They're going to be required to pay off that full $200, plus a little bit more money that we'll talk about in the next slide before that hold is lifted and they can renew their driver's license again. So just a couple quick facts to describe the program, I guess give a top level description of what the program is. We're going to start in the bottom left here where it says Omni-Based Services of Texas. So we've been doing lots of research on this program, and the data shows us actually that this program has adversely impacted so many folks in our general community. And so we'd like to give, I guess, just a top line description of how this program works in action. And to start, like I said, in the bottom left, the failure to appear/pay program is commonly called the Omni-Based program. It is actually named after Omni-Based Services of Texas, which is the private vendor that administers the program. So Omni-Based essentially communicates with DPS, Department of Public Safety, when a court places a hold on somebody's license, and they maintain a database of everybody who has holds. So now moving on to the bottom right here, the hold lifting fee bullet. Now I'd like to talk about when somebody gets a hold, how do they resolve it and what are the logistics associated with it? So like I said in the previous slide, let's say somebody gets a $200 speeding ticket. if they are unable to pay off that speeding ticket and they do not show up to court to pay that $200, a hold will be placed on their license by DPS, and Omnibase keeps that in their database. Now, if they want their hold to be lifted, they have to pay the full $200 for the original fine. They also may have to pay any additional fees incurred by collections if the jurisdiction that their ticket is in contracts with a collections agency. They'll have to pay the $200 plus the collections fee. And then they will have to pay a $10 hold lifting fee, which is a reimbursement fee. So of this $10 fee, $4 will stay with the court and $6 will go to Omnibase, which is their primary source of income. Now, moving over to the top right, remember that this is a debt-based license renewal program. The research shows us that people adversely impacted by this program do not have the ability to pay off their fines and fees. From the research that we've done in the past, we see that folks, the majority of folks with holds have median family incomes that are far less than the general population. And so when we're thinking about how we can get people to resolve their fees, it's important to recognize that there are other non-monetary strategies to resolve one's fines and fees that are currently underutilized across the state, as opposed to just simply paying off one's full $200 fee, if we keep going with that example. So all that to say, judges have the statutory ability to resolve one's fines and fees by granting waivers for indigency, allowing for community service instead of payment, and granting time served credit for prior offenses. But like I said, while these options are available under law, many courts underutilize these options, even for folks who have an established inability to pay. Also, Jen, can you mute, or can you take yourself? Oh, you did. Thank you. Okay, so lastly, in the top left now, just to get the last bit of background, there is no financial commitment to enter or exit this program. So courts can opt into this program. It's not required for municipal or JP courts to opt into. They have the ability to just choose whether they want to participate in it or not. But just as it is free to enter, it is also free to exit. So courts just need to give DPS a 30-day notice that they are terminating their contract, and then they will essentially be able to exit their contract free of charge. And so, like I said previously, a plethora of research has been done on this program to get at some of the logistics of it, to address some of the talking points from proponents of this program. One major talking point that people have brought up in the past is that the program's intention is to compel payment and encourage compliance in court. So, you know, the goal is if we place holds on somebody's license, they're going to be incentivized to pay off their fines and fees. They're going to be incentivized to show up to court. In 2021, we did a collections analysis on this very issue and found that there is no significant difference in the revenue collected for courts that use this program versus those that do not. So you'd anticipate that if a court is using the program, they're going to have higher collections as a result because of this enforcement mechanism, this compliance tool. But the research shows us that that is not the case. There is actually no difference in fines collected. Another talking point that's been brought up is that the program is a less punitive alternative to issuing warrants for somebody's arrest. So in 2023, we did an analysis on this very issue, and we found that municipal courts using this program issue both capious and Class C warrants at a significantly higher rate than those jurisdictions that do not use the program. Lastly, we have been in search of research to get at the financial impact of this program and the economic losses that result from this program and license restriction programs like it. So there was a national study done that found that a lost license under a license restriction program can decrease one's annual earnings by between $12,000 and $23,000. So we're looking at very large economic losses to people and their families, but also the community at large when we're employing driver's license restriction programs like the FTAP program.
All right, guys, trying to start my video. Okay, so before we jump into this, we're just going to give you an overview, if you will, of the presentation, the study that we're about to discuss. And there's a couple things, obviously, that we extend on. First is that we replicate past analysis on revenue collected and warrants issued by city courts using updated data. As you'll recall, Cole said that our last report was using data from 2021, this data, or from 2021, which means that we use data from, believe it or not, 2019. Those of us that are familiar with using or analyzing data knows that we always have to wait about a year or two to collect the data in and of itself because of the lag associated with data collection and reporting. In addition to using updated data, we extend past analysis on revenue collected and warrants issued to also include county or justice or JP courts. As we said, not just municipal courts can issue holds, but also JP courts, and they're issued majority on Class C tickets, largely traffic violations. In addition to this, and perhaps what we're most excited to be presenting today, in addition to our findings on the prior analysis, is an examination of this component that Cole discussed with regard to earnings lost. As Cole said, national research has found that debt-based driver's license restriction programs like the FTAP program can cost anyone annual earnings anywhere from $12,700 to $23,000. And we use a conservative estimate. So what we're going to do is plot those values by expired licenses. Before we do that, however, we just want to give, drew on that. Before we do that, my bad, guys, the beauty of technology. Let's go on real quick to just look at the current state of the holds using this updated data. What we know is that there are 3.7 million FTAP holds on record. This means that on average, there are people who have 5 holds. Anyone who has a hold has on average 5 holds. It is possible for you to have more than 1 hold as they're applied per case. That equates to just under 700,000 Texas drivers that are being impacted by this program. There is a disproportionate representation of Black drivers. While Black drivers only make up 11% of the driving population in the state of Texas, they make up 34% of all individuals, both with active and expired licenses that have holds. You'll also see here that the majority of holds underneath this program are associated with expired licenses. So whenever we're discussing the cost or the impact on one's annual earnings, we are talking about licenses that cannot be renewed due to being ineligible under the FTAP program. They have holds on their licenses and therefore they cannot resolve their issues. So we're definitely going to be examining those on a more comprehensive and statewide level, both cities and counties. But before we do that, we definitely want to jump into the prior analysis where we're replicating with municipalities and courts when we are looking at revenue and warrants issued. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Chris, and he is going to take that away for us. Oh, go backwards. I'll start.
Yeah, take your video off and go on mute. Chris will undo.
Hey, everybody. Cool. Hey, everybody. Good morning. As my colleague Jen just introduced me, my name is Chris Casella. I am a graduate intern and policy associate here on the CJ team at Texas Appleseed. Graduate intern because I just completed my master's in government at the University of Texas at Austin and am about to wrap up my PhD in government with a focus on American politics in the same area at UT Austin. So I'm going to talk about this study, and we're going to start, as we do with any type of research, with our research questions, right? So our first research question, we have 4 main ones for this project. The first is, are there differences in the revenue collected in municipal and JP courts that do and do not issue holds under the FTAP program? And if there are differences, are these differences statistically significant? And we're going to talk about what revenue collected means, what holds mean, right? As well as what statistically significant means in future slides, right? The second research question that we have is, are there differences in CAPIAS warrants issued for both municipal courts and JP courts? So this is the failure to appear and pay. CAPIAS warrants are if you are failing to pay fees, right? Failing to pay fines. Sorry about that. And if there are differences, what are the differences and are they statistically significant? The third research question that we have as we're walking through this is, are there differences in Class C warrants that are issued to both municipal and JP courts? So in failure to appear and pay, Class C warrants are those that are failure to appear as well as failure to pay, right? Covers both of them right there. And if there are differences, again, are the differences going to be statistically significant? Those are going to be the 3 I talk about. After this, Dr. Jen is going to come back and she's going to talk about the 4th, which is, how does the loss in earnings associated with expired licenses under FTAP vary among Texas cities and counties? So that's some really cool geospatial analysis that we're excited to share with y'all. But first, I'm going to go through and talk about the stats, the data, the methods, everything that we did to get to our results. All right. So let's talk data first, right? So our data sources, we use data from the year 2023. The first source is holds issued by jurisdiction, and that is going to be from OST, which is Omni-Based Services of Texas. Second, we have holds issued by licenses, and this is by DPS, Texas Department of Public Safety. That is on active licenses, on expired licenses, as well as data on licenses by zip code, as well as race and ethnicity. And finally, we have court activity by city and county, and this is again from DPS. That gives us jurisdictional population, the revenue collected, CAPIAS pro fine warrants that were issued, and Class C warrants that were issued. So those are our 4 big variables that we use to run these tests. What test are we running? As we go over to the methodology here on the right side of your screen, we do tests of differences for non-parametric distributions. Non-parametric distributions, we use something called the Wilcoxon-Mann-Whitney test, which is basically accounting for this large spread in data that we have, right? We have very tiny counties, we have very tiny cities, and then we have very big counties and very big cities. So this allows us to make those comparisons while accounting for what we would describe as outliers, right? We do those tests on 3 of our key variables, on revenue, on CAPIAS warrants issued, and Class C warrants. We're going to talk in the next slide about how we constructed those variables to account as well for the size of the jurisdiction that covers, right? We also test for differences in proportions. We do that for holds, CAPIAS warrants issues, and Class C warrants issued. And those are just some cross checks. We're going to look at some Z-scores. We're going to take y'all back to stats classes if you ever took that with those results, right? So last we have, one more thing. Last we have a geospatial plotting by holds and loss of earnings by city and county. You're going to see some maps there. And that's going to show us holds as well as this data of holds issued by license from the DPS that we talked about in that second bullet on the left there. So slide, if we go ahead here. So let's take a look here at this kind of descriptive data that we have. So here is a table 1 here. We have courts that issue FTAP holds. Courts that are defined as participating in the FTAP program are those that had any holds on record with the Omni-Based Services of Texas or Department of Public Safety, right? Cities and counties with multiple courts were condensed to reflect their underlying city or county. And table 1 over here provides the number of city and county courts with FTAP holds on record, as well as those without. So with regards to municipal courts, right, we see that about 77.5% of the municipal courts have some type of hold on record compared to 223 or 22.5% that do not. For justice courts at the county level, we have a little bit more of a spread here, right? We have 243 courts that have holds on record. That's about 95.7% compared to 11 courts that have no holds on record, right? That's 4.3%. So a little bit difference in courts that use and do not use holds depending on which level you are looking at. So we're going to go right ahead here and we're going to talk about some descriptive statistics of our key variables. First, let's talk about standardizing values, right? So standardizing values, we do this to address outliers. For holds and warrants that were issued by court, we take that number and we divide it by the jurisdictional population. We got that from the Office of Court Administration data, and we multiply that by 100, right? So it is holds or warrants issued by court over the population times 100, right? So we get some nicer numbers than 0.000006, right? Then for calculating the revenue collected, we take the total revenue that was collected by court in US dollars over a year, and we divide that by the criminal cases disposed, right? In our report, as well as in some of the limitations that we can talk about, why, if you're curious about the denominators that we used, happy to kind of answer those in the Q&A. But that's how we go about conducting this analysis, right? So on table 2 on the right, you have the average number of holds, warrants, and revenue collected by all courts. We present both the mean values, and then for revenue collected by criminal case, we present the median values, right? So for municipal courts, you have, for holds issued, about 50.9 per 100 residents. For capias warrants, you have about 2.6 per 100 residents. Class C warrants, 8.6, and then revenue collected by criminal case, it's $191.87, right? That is the median value that we have. For justice courts, we see values that are a little bit lower, right? So for the holds issued per 100 residents, we have about 43.3. For capias warrants, we have less than 1, just over a half. And then for Class D warrants, we have just over 2. However, the revenue collected by criminal cases for justice courts, the median value is higher, right? It's $216.64. So that's just our descriptive overview of the values that we are going to be working with as we go about conducting our analysis, which we can talk about now. So let's talk about courts that do and do not participate in the FTAP program. So remember, our first research questions are there differences here, right? We're looking for differences between courts that use holds and do not use holds. As you can see, at least descriptively, we do see some differences here. So for municipal courts, there are 769 courts that use holds that we found in our data, and there are 223 that do not, right? For capias warrants issued per 100 residents, we see there's about a 3 times difference, right? 3.1 compared to less than 1 at 0.8. For capias warrants issued per 100 residents, we see just under a 4 times difference, right? 10 for courts that do use holds and 2.6 for those that do not. There's also a difference in revenue there, right? The median value for courts that use holds is $192.48 compared to $178.15, right? So those are the differences for municipal courts. And now let's turn our attention to the county justice courts. So courts that use FTAP holds, we have 243 of them. Capias warrants issued per 100 residents is about half, right? It's about 0.5. Class C warrants issued per 100 residents is 2.2, and the revenue collected is $216.36. So you'll see it is not as uniform with regards to differences here as it was for the municipal courts, right? Because for courts that do not use FTAP holds, we see about 5 times more amount of capias warrants issued per 100 residents at 2.4. We see about half as many Class C warrants issued per 100 residents at just under 1 at 0.9. But we do see higher revenue collected, right? We see $259.18 compared to $216.36 between courts that do not use holds and courts that do. So our research questions here, right? We're looking for differences and we're looking for significant differences. So for revenue collected, for capias warrants issued, for Class C warrants in order, is there a difference between municipal and JP courts that do and do not use FTAP? For revenue collected, yes. But if so, is that difference statistically significant? No, there is no statistical significance in revenue collected for city or JP courts. Is there a difference in capias warrants issued between courts that do and do not use FTAP, that use holds? Yes. Cities that issue capias pro fine warrants have a significantly higher difference in their rate, right? About 3.9 times higher. We do not find that difference for county courts, which we'll talk about in the next slide, right? And finally, for Class C warrants issued, is there a difference? Yes. Yes, cities that issue Class C warrants at a significantly higher rate, right? About 3.8 times higher. So those are the statistically significant differences as compared to just the visual differences that you saw in the previous slide. right? So now we do these Wilcoxon-Mann-Whitney tests to test for significant differences in these non-parametric distributions that we see. Again, non-parametric because we're accounting for these big outliers where you have the real tiny counties, the big counties, real tiny cities, and the big cities, right? So we can see for revenue collected that even though there was a difference, that is not a statistically significant difference. When we look for statistical significance, again, if we're recalling our stats classes, we're looking for a p-value that is less than 0.05. That is not present for the revenue collected variables for either municipal courts or justice courts. For Cappius warrants, however, we do see a significant difference in municipal courts, right? There is a significant difference between the Cappius warrants issued between courts that do use holds and do not use holds, but that relationship is not present for justice courts. And finally, for Class C warrants, we see a significant difference again, right? Between courts that use holds and do not use holds, but not for those that are justice or county courts, right? All right. And then just real quick, we'll talk about the significant differences in proportions, right? And this is, we're using z-tests here. And the main goal here is to just see within a given sample, right, within our rate, are there these significant differences? For our municipal results on Cappius warrants and Class C warrants, yes, there is a significant difference. For our JP results, as we would expect, no, there's not a significant difference. And we're happy to talk about the ins and outs of that more in some of the Q&A if you're really interested in the stats of it. So let's talk about our overall findings, right, for the revenue and for the warrants. We find that there is no significant difference in the revenue collected by the courts, but the differences that we're seeing, right, city courts are driving the force of the holds. In fact, the test of differences in proportions show that city courts issue holds at a significantly higher rate than their JP counterparts, right? That's 1.2 times higher. And the finding of no significant difference between JP courts that do and do not issue holds for the issuance of warrants is really still informative, right? If FTAP holds served as an alternative to warrants, then a negative association really should be seen here. So these were our first 3 research questions that we have, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Jen to talk about the geospatial analysis.
All right, thank you, Chris. So let's move on to the geospatial analysis. As we mentioned, the conservative or the lower end estimate associated with a lost license for a debt-based driving restriction program is $12,700. The number of expired licenses with an FTAP hold is 4,277 licenses. Originally, this number was 405, but as we accounted for the data, what we did was we dropped zip codes that were out of state and we dropped zip codes that were invalid. There is some data that we received where the zip code associated with the hold was 0003, which is like not a zip code. And so we had to drop those data points, which then brought us to 402,000. If you do some real simple multiplication math, you'll see here that this estimate, by this estimate alone, a loss in earnings on an annual basis is costing people with FTAP holds $5.1 billion on an annual basis. And so what we want to know is, what does that look like across the state? Are there communities that are losing more than others? Are there residents that are losing more than others? As Chris mentioned, Texas is lovely in the way that we're so vast in our variance with big cities and little cities and big counties and little counties, and so you're going to see the variation there. And for money and lost licenses, there is no exception in that regard. So let's take a look. So here you see question 4, which is the number of expired licenses with an FTAP hold. There's 2 maps here, and what we used is essentially called a heat map. And so what we did for cities, we mapped them by the zip code associated with the license so that you could see essentially the concentration or the amount of people within that area that are being impacted by these holds. The darker the area, the more holds correspond to that area. As you see on the map on the left, if you take a look at the map on the right, the darker the area corresponds to the more loss in learnings For cities, that range is anywhere from 12,700, which is it consists of a lot of, incidences or communities that have just one hold on a license, all the way to 55.4 million, which if we had to take a guess at which city that was, you could probably throw two or three out there and hit the spaghetti on the wall, as you say. So let's see what it looks like in terms of cities themselves. So here we take a look at the top 10 cities with the most expired licenses and lost earnings under FTAP. As I said, Houston, Dallas, those are our big contributors. San Antonio is not far behind. It is very unfortunate both the city and the county just chose to renew their contracts with FTAP. Which of course is concerning, specifically not just for these 29,000 individuals that are already having expired license under FTAP, but also the active licenses as well. Austin, Fort Worth, Corpus, El Paso, Arlington, Laredo, Waco. Obviously, from a city perspective, the denser and the more populations that you have, the more earnings you are going to see lost. That's the same thing that holds true for counties. However, keep in mind, and you'll see here at the county level, what we mean, there is no rural community that is essentially exempt from the FTAP program. Mapping these values by zip code gives us a look at the city perspective, but we all know from a decision maker's perspective, it's not just on city council members, it's also on county commissioners, it's also on legislators that represent those communities and those counties and those constituents. And so it's beneficial to us to look at both of those geographical markers. And so here we take a look at counties and what that looks like in terms of what it costs someone to have a lost license under the FTAP program. The range for counties, again, ranges from $12,700 all the way to $814.3 million. You can guess, again, Harris, Dallas, those are going to be your bigger counties. But as you can see here, some of our rural counties are not exempt. They are losing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, because they have constituents or Texans that have expired licenses under the FTAP program. So definitely worth asking decision makers, the FTAP program, what is it costing my constituents in comparison to what it's bringing in, right? And so here we can take a look at some of the counties. I'll take you through each of these legend categories. As you can see, the ones that are asterisked are considered to be rural by the Texas Housing and Urban Communities Affairs Division. So there are several communities here that I said, again, are losing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in earnings due to not having a license. The research shows, right, obviously having a license is more indicative of maintaining employment than a high school degree. And so it's imperative that we get Texans back on the road to be able to make sure not just that they could feed their families, but obviously for the Texas community at large. And so here I'm just gonna go through the remainder of the categories. As you see, the higher up that we get in earnings, the more associated it is with bigger jurisdictions. So just some initial discussion for that, and obviously whenever we release this report, you'll have more information on the top 20 cities, top 20 counties that are issuing not just holds, not just lost licenses, but also warrants on top, rates of warrants and rates of holds on top of that. But something to consider whenever we're talking about the geographical landscape of the lost licenses under the FTAP program is that if all holds were resolved across the state, the courts stand to gain roughly $14.7 million. That's just from that $4 portion hold that courts collect from those holds, just from the holds, right? Which undoubtedly pales in comparison to the $5.1 billion lost in earnings from Texans who are impacted by this. As I said, rural communities are not exempt, and a loss in one's earnings is a loss for Texas economy. So Chris mentioned earlier that, of course, there are some limitations of the studying. There are some limitations of the data in what we're using. Anyone who does any sort of inferential research or any sort of higher level research knows that the analysis is only as good as the data is. And unfortunately, the state of the data when it comes to court systems right now, there are definitely some shortcomings that we are not exempt from in this. For instance, the underlying denominator, some of you might be asking yourself, well, why didn't you use criminal cases or Class C misdemeanors? Well, first things first, that would have to be like just a straight up referral number that comes from OCA or the courts reporting to OCA, and that does not exist. Unfortunately, there are like 5 different categories on which they categorize cases under, and you have to essentially hope that you're not double counting them, because you will eventually. Mostly because they report from a monthly and an aggregate basis. So we can't follow cases individually. We can't tell you who got what, who paid what fine was imposed on what case, or whether a case was even fined or not. And so there's a lot of what ifs in the data that impact the outcome of the analysis and the outcome of the finding. However, we want to assure you that we did our best in our due diligence to use the data that was available, as this is the data that's also available to decision makers and to agency heads and how they approach the outcomes that they're seeking in court activity. And so if we're limited, you can rest assured that they are limited as well. Luckily, there has been some movement around this. The state legislature and the judicial branch of Texas has acknowledged that the data system is definitely in need of repair, and that we need to start collecting individual level case data in order to be able to move through these process. Sorry about this. It allows for individuals to address obviously discrepancies in the data. It ensures measurement and allows for higher level inferential data. So now in this study, we are looking at differences and whether or not those differences matter. What would be valuable, or even more valuable, would be to determine the exact impact that FTAP holds have on appearance rates. In order to do that, we would need to be able to run something like a regression analysis that would require individual level case data in order to track those impacts and control for all of the different factors that impact a case. For instance, whether it's dismissed, whether it's taken care of, or whether or not a fine has been resolved in an alternative matter, such as community service, jail time served, whether or not someone's been put on a payment plan, things of that nature. As I said, the legislature, both the legislature and the agency, the judicial branch, are aware of this, and they have made moves to try to improve this. Last session alone, HB 841 was passed, and this is a pretty big one, that requires individual level case data to be collected, managed, and reported. This is going to be definitely an overhaul in the making, as it is paired with the replacement of the court's data system, which is a legacy data system that the legislature appropriated $6 million over the biennium to replace. And so that is definitely going to be a haul. The judicial branch, the judicial council has their work cut out for them in that regard. I also like HB 1182. It's not something that you see commonly referenced by the judicial council, but I like it because, one, yes, it applies to trial courts, but what it does is it stipulates definitively what it is exactly needs to be collected in a court case. And so I think there is a lot of improvement that can be done to the numbers that we've seen, as Chris and myself have sat in this data for months on end. You know, we sit here and we go down one road, we go down another, and constantly the outcome of the result is, or the outcome of our conversations is, if only the data looked like this. But it does not, unfortunately. And so we're very much looking forward to working with the legislature and the judicial council to continue their work around improving the legacy system and their individual level court data to be able to improve court efficiency all around.
Alrighty. There we go. And so continuing on Jen's point about improving efficiency, getting people into court, we wanted to talk about I wanted to talk about that when we've been researching this program for the past few years, we wanted to find out what does work, what the research shows does get people into court, what does improve appearance rates and compliance. And we found two things that are quite effective here: text message reminders and court form redesigns. Ideas 42 is a behavioral science nonprofit that does research on both of these issues, on both of these initiatives, per se. They found that when courts send people text messages to remind them of their court dates, that give the location, that highlight the consequences for non-appearance, that people will show up more often. They've also found that when police departments and courts redesign court summons forms and like traffic citations, meaning they simplify the jargon, they highlight pertinent language, they move critical information to the top of the forms rather than in small font at the bottom, things like that. They find that when they make all of these redesigns to make them more legible, digestible for drivers, that people will also show up to court more often. But the key here is that the combination of both of these alternatives produces the best results. So when text message reminders and court form redesigns are implemented in unison, failure to appear rates can decrease by 36% for jurisdictions who employ them. And so now that leads us to where we go from here and the recommendations that we at Texas Appleseed have for stakeholders and the Texas legislature at large to move forward. Our first one is, oh, you went the wrong way. First one is to repeal the FTAP program and lift all existing holds. So we strongly implore the Texas legislature to act on this issue at the statewide level. Last session, Senator Hughes filed SB 1281. Representative Diego Bernal filed House Bill 4074, which would both terminate the program statewide. Those bills unfortunately did not pass. Representative Bernal has refiled last session's bill. That bill number is House Bill 2609. So that's already been filed. Texas Appleseed is also working to place a more comprehensive piece of legislation, a more comprehensive draft with somebody as we move forward. Second recommendation is that, keep going back. Second recommendation is that we encourage courts to use alternatives to payment that are already allowed under the law. So as I said at the beginning of the presentation, when talking about different non-monetary alternatives to just the regular payment of somebody's fees, these alternatives are drastically underutilized across the state. And so we would recommend that judges across the state start utilizing waivers for indigency, start allowing for community service and applying time served credit, because these are already things available under the law, and now is the time that they can employ them. Third, is on the state's text messaging reminder program. So in 2023, the state allocated funding to the Office of Court Administration to create and implement a text message reminder program. This program is available to county courts, so JP courts at no cost, and it is available to municipal courts at a small fee. So we would encourage courts to opt into this program so they can see the appearance benefits that reminders produce, that the research shows does improve compliance. The fourth one, let me change it here. Oh, thank you, Jen. The fourth one, we recommend that the state create a uniform traffic citation system for jurisdictions across the state to use. So in 2023, Representative Bojani filed House Bill 4486. This bill would allow for the creation of a uniform citation in Texas, and it had great bipartisan support. It passed out of committee very quickly, but it unfortunately died on the calendar towards the end of the House vote deadline. And so he has refiled this bill again this session. That is House Bill 2136. And hopefully that'll get across the finish line this time. So the state can create a standardized citation for all jurisdictions to use. Lastly, We recommend that the state explore additional newer tools that can improve efficiency for courts and streamline data collection. Specifically, I'm talking about electronic citations or electronic tickets. So if Texas were to have a uniform electronic citation, where let's say you get a digital copy of your citation and you can resolve your case online. You can message the court online, things like that. Data could quickly be passed along to other state agencies that touch traffic stops in some capacity. So that would be TxDOT, that would be TCOL, the Commission on Law Enforcement, that would be DPS and OCA. And so all of that said, those are our major recommendations. But I think our biggest one would be number one, to repeal the FTAP program. We implore y'all to join us in this effort. The research shows us that this is a harmful program that is being counterproductive for Texans, their families, and the Texas community at large. And we're hoping that you can work with us to get Texans back on the road to financial prosperity, because when you're free to drive, you are free to work. And so that concludes our presentation for now. I'll let Jen go to the next slide, where you can see our contact information. We will send out this webinar after the fact, or after it's over, so you can have access to these slides and explore our social media pages. And right now we've got about 10 minutes left, and we are happy to take any questions that y'all have. I know a couple folks have been asking questions in the Q&A box, so we're going to take a look at those and go through and answer those. And if you have any in the meantime, please feel free to add those. So give us 1 second here.
Okay, folks, so I'm looking at some of the questions that got put in. It seems like some of y'all's questions were answered, or at least my colleagues were able to get answers to with regard to handouts and research links. The 3 questions that are still pending that I see here, it looks like, does active licenses constitute those they are holding and threatening suspension because of the FTAP? So yes, an active license constitutes those that they currently have holds on them, but they're not threatening suspension. They're threatening inability to renew your license. So one of the things that's important to clarify is that in many other states, what debt-based driver's license restrictions programs look like is that they suspend the license as it currently is. The FTAP program does not suspend the license as it currently is. So if you have a hold on an active license, you can still drive, your license is still valid. However, if you continue to leave that matter unresolved, and your license becomes ineligible, it expires, you will not be able to renew your license because of that FTAP hold or holds and the costs associated with it. So it's not uncommon, for instance, for us to have clients or to work with individuals who say, I didn't even know that I had a hold on my license. It was a ticket that, I forgot. It was a parking ticket, it was whatever, a moving violation that I forgot of. It slipped my mind. I didn't take care of it, or it was in another jurisdiction and I just thought it got dropped. And they're now having to pay what started off with hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars from back pay for late fees, for warrants issued, for things of that nature, just to resolve their hold. And so what started off as a well-intentioned placement or tool to be able to generate compliance spirals out into a massive financial impact on the individual that's being impacted. The next question was, were there any counties that shared databases? So as you all know, there are 254 counties in the state of Texas. Counties themselves, county courts themselves, JP courts themselves, there are slightly over 800. There are multiple JP courts in a county. You may have noticed that when we talked about counties, we only talked about 254 counties. We didn't talk about 800 courts. That's because we condensed all the JP courts into a county to be able to interpret the findings a little bit more palatably or digestibly, if you will. Ideally, we would be able to get this information on an individual level case data from counties. Unfortunately, though, there is so much variation in the way that counties collect and disseminate data that it would be very difficult to be able to make sure that the data is what we need it to be across the board. So pulling from a state agency allows us that uniformity at the very least. And so this is why whenever we have a state that has so many jurisdictions or so much variance with regard to how things are practiced, that we attempt to seek uniformity when it comes to data collection and management and evaluation for the purpose of efficiency, right, and effectiveness. And that's not something that we're doing very well with the FTAP program. Whenever a hold is placed, Omnibase places that hold, but DPS personnel are the ones that manage that hold between the person and the driver. And so what is presumably supposed to be a responsibility taken on by OST is also now taken on by DPS personnel. So it's ineffective and it's wasting time on their end, despite the fact that there is no financial tie for contracts. The last question is around language. What role does language accessibility and maybe lack thereof impact the positive impact that non-punitive approaches can have on getting people out to court? So this is addressing essentially the behavioral nudges, and Cole can talk a little bit more about this if he wants to just jump in for sure. But I will say that the research that we follow is based on social science. It's based on behavioral science and how people act and respond to certain things. Right now, we know that more than ever, there is a contentious nature between the justice system and the general public at large. The language, whenever language is aggressive, whenever it's punitive, it instills fear and it doesn't solicit a response from someone who is already fearful of the justice system for a myriad of reasons. It could be you don't have the money, it could be you have a prior warrant, it could be you're a person of color and it just doesn't work out well for you, right? And so there are a number of reasons why you would fear the system. And so when you use language that says you have to deal with your fine now or else, it doesn't exactly solicit compliance. If anything, it increases fear and just makes people want to run away. Paul, did you have anything to add to that? Okay. I think that's it on questions. Farah, Natasha, anyone else got? Are there any other questions?
Let's see. There is one that's quite a long one.
Okay, is this it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. In Texas, a license lasts, I believe, for 6 years, and if a hold is done on a 4-year and the homeowner has 2 years to be able to make arrangements to pay the non to. The impact of a loss of revenue is not experienced. Correct. Correct. This is only on a lost license, but if you have to remember, so for an active license, right, it wouldn't necessarily be financially detrimental to you, provided that you can pay the costs associated with fines and fees with your case, right? The lost earnings only applies to licenses that have been expired. And so what we know from this data is that more than half of the licenses that are impacted by the FTAP program are expired. So we are talking about licenses that have been lost. But no, if it's been placed on a 4-year and you still have 2 years, I would definitely recommend resolving within those 2 years before this becomes a bigger issue. All right, folks, I think that's all we got. Our contact information is definitely here on the screen. We've left it up for a minute, so hopefully you've been able to jot it down. If not, you found this webinar, so you all know how to find us. Definitely feel free to reach out if there are any questions or any comments or concerns that you have about the study. If you are with a legislative office or a decision maker that is interested in learning more about your jurisdiction and how it specifically is impacted, please do not hesitate to contact us. We would love to share that information with you and hopefully make you a champion of joining us in getting Texans back on the road. Thanks, you all. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Cole. Thank you, Natasha, Christian, and Farah. I appreciate all y'all. And thanks to y'all. Have a great day, guys. Bye.